Welcome to Millennium Counseling Center's podcast, where each week we go in depth into all things mental health, addiction recovery, and being our healthiest and happiest self. Enjoy. So, Derek, we're at January 22nd. How are the New Year's resolutions going? Sticking to everything?
Yeah, I generally do not do that personally. I try to set a lot of things that I want to get done, but I don't necessarily put a stop or start at the beginning of the year. With that being said, I do think that it is, kind of a new beginning for things, and with a lot of people talking about those things, then you start to kind of look and see what are things that I could adjust or change in my life. But yeah, I would say so far I'm doing pretty well on it. But like I said, it wasn't necessarily a hard start date on January 1st.
Yeah. Well, and I think that I was just reflecting this morning that this is the cliche, right? That everyone signs up for the gym membership and all these things on January 1st. And we're kind of nearing that time where we kind of look around and we're like, what have we done? Have we started and maintained the changes that we're hoping to? And what's interesting about it is so many people push off changes to the beginning of the year rather than January 15th or 22nd or, March 10th. So that the concept of change and using that as a date as a motivating factor, it's just kind of an interesting thing, right? That we put so much pressure on this changing of a year towards our lives being kind of any different.
Yeah, I agree with all that. How do you handle that? Do you do that?
Well, I noticed that, with the time off around the holiday, I just had more time to think. I had more time to think about what I felt like was going well, where I felt like things were kind of stalled out. And I didn't necessarily think about it in terms of January 1st being the beginning of anything, but more of those thoughts were kind of I want to put more intentionality and more discipline really towards things that upon reflection weren't getting the same amount of attention or attention. And just, I think sometimes just my personality is I just kind of put my head down and work and just stay in my routines, and then it was really helpful to reflect and be what are my routines? And am I feeling happy about them? And are they helping me get to where I want to go?
Yeah, I think the challenge with a New Year's resolution is that for the most part, when people make the decision to do that, they tend to shoot very high. They shoot for a really high bar, and which is fine. Whatever things that we want or we want to be a part of our life, it's there's nothing wrong with kind of, setting those, well, I guess, the difference is between goals and expectations, right? If to set high goals is great, to set expectations can be tougher, because I think that naturally what we do is when an expectation isn't met, then ultimately there's some resentment, and usually the resentment is towards ourselves for not setting or not reaching that expectation. And so you're setting yourself up to have all these really high goals. And then the flip side of that is when one of those or two of those or however many is not reached, then it's that's over. That didn't work, right? And so it ends up kind of pushing us back to the other side of that, where, I think that can be limiting for us and sometimes gets in the way, because it feels like we either couldn't do it or wouldn't do it. Most of the time we feel like we wouldn't do it, and then, have some negative feelings towards that. And that at the same time, kind of depletes our ability to stay motivated and want to do those things.
Yeah. I guess one of the things for me that I kind of oscillate between is, and I think you're right, a visualization of what the outcome would be, right? Or if effort and discipline and consistency was if that took place, then this is what would happen, right? I would be able to do this many push-ups or chin-ups, I would save this amount of money or whatever it is, right? And I think one of the things that I try to pull myself back from is to really let go of like that designated outcome, right? That I will feel better if I save any money, right? And so if I don't reach my goals by February 1st of saving $500, but I save $100, then I'm still in the act of saving, right? And so to kind of be kind of in that headspace of progress, not perfection, yes, I am saving, but maybe it's not looking the way that I thought when I started this. That's one of the things I'm really trying to do is just, is this taking place in some shape? And how do I feel about that? And if I want to like increase it, then I can do that. I can change the way that I'm progressing in this, but really not thinking of, oh, I want to end up in this end point. Because I think that's just for me and a lot of the clients that I talk to, is a recipe for shame and kind of getting stunted in the process.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And, one of the things that I try to do myself, but also try to share with other people is, to your point, as opposed to looking at the outcome of a bunch of actions, I like to have them be a series of 1-day goals. That if I wanted to work out 20 times in January, right, then I know I need to work out, every 2 out of every 3 days, right? And so today was a day I didn't, so tomorrow I will, the next day I will. And then I need to make sure that if that next day is a day that I'm supposed to do that, or I have planned to do that, then I follow through on that. I think part of the reason, one is it feels more doable. And, if I say, okay, I'm going to work out tomorrow, then that feels more realistic. But secondarily, then even when we don't reach that goal, if we can kind of put that in its own little box for just that day I didn't reach my goal instead of for the overall month, now it's all ruined, it's all blown up. I might as well just go back to, kind of where I was before. I think it just allows us to, we're not going to succeed on everything. To your example, progress, not perfection. But I think that the larger we make it, the harder it is to do, and the further we fall when we don't reach that.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. And I guess one thing that I also try to come back to is, what were some of the reasons for that visualization of the outcome? Like, was I feeling less than? Was I anxious? Was I comparing myself to other people and thinking I didn't have enough, or whatever it was? And really try to use that as a way to better understand, where is my motivation in this? Do I really want to be like different in a certain way for me? And, or is this really about something else? Because sometimes that can be a huge kind of differentiator when it comes to consistency and motivation is, if I'm trying to outperform someone else, right, or do something for someone else's kind of admiration or affirmation, then that's not within me. Like, that's outside of me. Whereas, right, if this is really about like, hey, I want to feel differently inside of me, and this is about me, then I want to make sure I'm really connected to that, because I think that also is a big determinant of whether or not we stay on course towards the things that matter.
Yeah, and I think that leads into a kind of bigger thing of where, to your point, we identify something that we think is a challenge or an issue. Let's say maybe I oftentimes feel insecure, and then let's say you feel financially insecure, and then you come up with a plan of something, to your point, where you're going to spend $500 less this month, right? And then we do it, and then lo and behold, at the end of that month, yes, we've saved our $500, but we know we still feel financially insecure, right? So we have an idea of a solution that's going to, in our minds, make us feel a certain way. And usually it's not as simple as that. Usually it's not as simple as saving $500. Now all of a sudden my financial insecurity is going to be gone. And so even when you achieve those goals, sometimes, if depending on what you believe that's going to mean to you or what's going to happen, then oftentimes, and this is something, I face quite a bit, is people are disappointed that even though they followed through and did their goals, it didn't have the intended effect on them internally as they thought it would. And so, but it sounds like a doable, easy solution to that problem. And so what I always do is I encourage people to really, to your point, go back to the root of what you're feeling and look at, because there's probably there are ways to work on that, and there are ways to kind of have that improve, but it's not usually as simple as changing one aspect of your life that will be a solution.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and kind of bringing in some kind of more client stuff, I would say that if somebody comes in and does therapy for a month and stops a maladaptive coping behavior that's destructive to them and their family or relationship or whatever it is, a month later, the problems of their life have not been solved. you know yes, you can see incremental positive steps towards not doing something for a month, but the kind of the surrounding kind of perspective of kind of your environment of your life, that's not fixed. So then I kind of then come back to me and say, to your point earlier, Derek, it's like, this one thing, steps towards that is not going to kind of have the effect over my entire life. It may help me feel better about this thing over time, but I really need to think a little bit more holistically of like, hey, look, my life is all interconnected. And just because I isolate one thing and try to make some progress on that one thing, that doesn't necessarily equate to everything else.
Yeah, and that same concept, I see this continuously in people in recovery, whether it's from substances or some other types of behaviors, is that they will originally decide to make that decision because they are unhappy and want to be happy, or they aren't feeling good about themselves and they want to feel good about themselves. And so then they set the goal of, okay, let's say it's somebody with alcohol. All right, I'm not going to drink. Now, a month later, I haven't had a drink, and yet I'm still not happy, right? I thought this was going to make me happy. And the beginning of that many times is just kind of minimizing and eliminating the consequences of that behavior. So we're reducing the negatives, but we're not necessarily getting the benefits of the positives. And part of that takes time. It's you can't simply stop doing things that are hurting you and then you're going to shoot up to the top of everything's great, right? We have to add in there. So, and that's why, I oftentimes talk to people about the difference between abstinence and recovery, is that abstinence removes and reduces some of those consequences. But the work of recovery, which is, primarily around being the best version of yourself and living as a person that you feel you can be proud of on a day-to-day basis, that's where the benefits come in. And that can't be changed in a day, right? That's when we are doing things, we're trying to be kind and compassionate and honest and reliable and all of those things, and at the same time, not drinking. And so if you can do both of those, then in the longer term, then you can get to the place you want to be internally, but it's not going to happen that quickly. And I think sometimes people are disappointed by that. And I try to remind them that and again, it goes back to something we talked about before. It's just, it's setting expectations, and are those realistic expectations? Because if they don't turn out the way you want them to, then there's resentment either towards people who asked you to make this change in your life, or towards yourself, or towards the world, or whatever. If everything isn't magically all better and we don't understand that, then part of that is because the expectation that we had set in the beginning wasn't necessarily realistic, and there wasn't really any reason to believe that would be true, other than that's what we wanted to have happen.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of a book I read or an article I was reading where someone was maybe like 7 or 8 years ago, someone was describing that we're so conditioned to kind of want the positive experiences and be okay with that element of our life, but then be like, think negatively or be upset with the more painful experiences. And my takeaway from this thing that I read was like, if I have a headache, I'm going to be upset or agitated. But if I can be open that a headache is something that could be a natural thing for a person, and to not say that this is bad, that this is just is, then I've somehow now like becoming more okay with all of my experiences. And so kind of getting back more on topic, it's kind of like, so if I take steps for a month and everything is not, kind of fixed or better, or I'm not feeling the way that I thought I would, like that's just part of what maybe we can feel through this process. And that maybe before, when maybe we weren't taking some steps, like we were more kind of maybe not as engaged with these feelings. And now we just happen to be more connected to the feelings of our relationship with money, or our relationship with alcohol, our relationship with, you know, our weight or health or exercise, whatever it is. And so sometimes I think when we take steps like this, it actually makes us more in tune with the feelings around it, which again, if we judge those, we're probably going to get really discouraged and want to go backwards to, because that's when we weren't feeling this way. But what I try to embrace is that whatever the experience that I'm feeling is, then that's just part of what is going on with me.
Yeah, and I think that it's something I like to talk about with people too. Is we need that range in our life, right? We need to, we need some of the downs so that we can appreciate the ups. It's the change. It's the ability that there's a range of how we can feel that makes the things on the high end of that feel so good. I joke, I've got a couple buddies in San Diego, and I don't ever hear them say, today the weather was amazing, right? I do hear when it's raining or when it's snowing. And in Chicago, right, where we have such a wide range of weather and seasons and all that, like, if it's March and it's 45 degrees, everybody's thrilled, right? But that only happens because we also have January where it's -2. And so those things, that range, although when it's -2, we may not love it, that, helps us for the times when it's 40 and we're happy. We need the range of that, because otherwise then everything just becomes the baseline. And there are no times that are up. It's just kind of flat.
So what would you say, Derek, if someone did an intention or a resolution 21 days ago, 22 days ago, and they're not where they thought they would be? How should they focus on today or tomorrow or moving forward?
I would say that what you did days 1 through 20, that what we want to do on day 21 is the exact same as if we had done 1 through 20 or not done 1 through 20. And so I think that if let's say throughout this month I had done everything exactly the way I want it to, and now it's day 21, then I would have a goal of what I want to do today, and I would try to follow through on that. I don't believe that's any different based on what we have done or haven't done for the first 20 days. And so I think if you can kind of hold that to just each day, what is my goal to do, and recognize that, yes, I might be further along if I had done it every day for the first 20 days, but it wouldn't change. Today, I would still need to follow through on those goals. And so we have to, I always encourage people to have a short memory and to use a 48-hour rolling window in their head, the last 24 hours and the next 24 hours. And, because if I can do that, if I work out today, then tomorrow when I get up, how have the last 24 hours gone? Oh, they've gone pretty well. I worked out yesterday. And then we oftentimes get too far back in the past or too far in the future. And if we haven't followed through on those things, then the past is, I feel bad about the fact that I didn't do what I said I was going to do. And the future is, I'm worried that I'm going to keep doing this and still feel this way in the future. So I encourage people to have a really short window of what they look at in their lives. And this is something I've implemented in my own life years ago. And I think this sometimes drives people crazy, but I essentially live in a 5-day rolling window at this point in my life. I don't often think about what it's going to be like in a year, and I don't often think about what happened a year ago. Very focused on this present window, because I believe that that's for someone like me with my brain, I think the happiest, best place is in the present.
Yeah. And I think that is kind of absolutely helpful for so many different things, that it isn't what you did 5 days ago or the last week or where you think you should be. It's just where you are. And if you think that changes in certain areas of your life will help you today for a year from now, it's just in what you do today. So I think that's absolute, that fits in so many different areas.
Well, and the opportunity to make those changes is still the same, right? Because if I did say, for instance, I said I was going to work out every day in January, and now it's January 22nd, and I haven't worked out. When it came to February 1st, I was still going to need to continue that trend. If my goal was to be fit, then I was still going to, on February 1st, I was going to have to keep doing that, right? If I wanted to stay in that place. And so whether I started on January 1st or whether I started January 22nd, each day would look the same if I'm able to follow through on that, whether I did 1 through 20 or not.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of goes back to like just who is this for, right? If this was to prove something to someone else or something external, right? Then maybe if you hadn't done anything for the first 21 days, then maybe you feel like you're not able to like kind of get that, right? Whereas if this is for you, it's kind of really kind of up in the air of starting January 1st or January 21st or 22nd, like you're just starting something. So yeah, I really like that idea. So what about people that have done something the last 21 days, right? And they're like, what about that headspace?
Well, I think it's the exact same thing, right? I think that if I work out for the month of January and then don't work out for the rest of the year, by June, I'm not going to be feeling very good. And so, that's kind of where I go back to that day 22 should look the same either way. If that's really what I want to do and that's important to me and I make it a priority in my life, then that's kind of the interesting thing about these resolutions is, right? Like either we did them or we didn't. And I would say, the bigger question is, am I doing it? Not did I or will I? It's am I right now doing this? Am I doing this today?